Good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, distinguished guests, but we're all distinguished guests here tonight, aren't we, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you, Chris, for your introduction. His Excellency, thank you for your very kind comments. Although I'm very proud of having been the youngest woman to enter the Australian Federal Parliament, you can imagine when I go to schools these days and I'm introduced in that way, they go, God, you're so old. So it's almost 20 years ago that I embarked on political life, but I'm very honoured to be here today in a very different capacity as Australia's Ambassador for Women and Girls, and to welcome you to this IORA, Women's Economic Empowerment event. Australia's particularly pleased to be hosting, and we are delighted to acknowledge the fact that the Malaysian government has been wonderful and kind in hosting this event here in Kuala Lumpur. You know what, Deputy Secretary General, you're not the only one that can get a plug for tourism in, given this is a textile and tourism conference. I haven't been here in my capacity before as the Ambassador, but I have been here on family holidays. Most recently, in Borneo, went to Sabah to look at orangutans because my son is a redhead. And so he thought we should visit his cousins. Yes, I'm very committed. We'll get on to textiles later, but indeed tourism as well. Australia is very excited about the fact that we've been able to gather here representatives from the 20 IORA countries. We're very pleased and particularly excited by the opportunities that come with being chair. And I speak on behalf of our Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, when she sees extraordinary opportunities in Australia's chairmanship role this year and, of course, next year. But doesn't this event bring together such a broad range of people, such a diverse range of backgrounds and cultures? Among us, we have entrepreneurs of small and big business. We've got a range of sectors represented, obviously a focus on tourism and textiles. We've got international businesswomen. We've got women who are just starting out. And we've got women who may be working at the local level in their communities. Our communities may be at different points, and we may face different barriers. But you know what? Not one country has managed to achieve equality between men and women. None of us, I don't believe, has fully unlocked the economic potential of women. And I suspect I speak for all of you when I say that empowering women to make choices and to fulfil their potential is something in which we all believe. In terms of Australia, well, you've heard from the High Commissioner that this is a priority for Australia. Women's economic empowerment is a priority, but it's also central to our foreign policy agenda. Minister Julie Bishop has made clear it has a central role in our foreign policy paradigm. And that's partly why we have an ambassador for women and girls. I'm the second ambassador for women and girls, former Ambassador Penny Williams, who I understand was the former High Commissioner to Malaysia as well. But we've been given very specific objectives, 3 in particular. 1 is to promote women's political leadership. 2nd, to ensure the elimination or at least the reduction of violence against women, whether that's in their homes and communities or indeed in conflict or post-conflict or fragile environments. And the 3rd priority is, of course, the economic empowerment of women. Because women's empowerment generally can't happen without specifically economic empowerment, whether we're talking in Australia or the Indian Ocean region. We know that investing in women's economic empowerment is the smart thing to do. You know, the research is in, the evidence is there. Promoting economic empowerment is smart economics. And when it comes to Australia, well, like many of your countries, we've made some inroads. We've seen an increase in women's labour force participation since the 80s at around 45% up to 60%. We know that women are actively involved at equal levels in education in most part. We know that there's been a strong growth in recent years in the number of women involved in small business. 4.8% of women running businesses, that increase, as opposed to men. There's been a reduction by 8.7% in men running businesses in Australia in the last decade. We've introduced a paid parental leave scheme in an attempt to give working parents, but women in particular, greater opportunities when they decide to have a child or indeed return to work. But we also know we've got a lot more to do. I talked about women's labour force participation, and my notes tell me that there's a gender pay gap of 17.5%, but that's changed. As I got on the plane to come here, there's a newsflash. Women's gender pay gap, or the gender pay gap in Australia, is now 18%. We've gone backwards. So we've got some challenges as well. And we know that while women's workforce participation has increased, guess what? Women still do twice the amount of household chores than men in Australia. I don't know, how's your vacuuming, High Commissioner? Are you... So I dare joke about these issues, but of course they're critical to ensuring that women have equal opportunities and empowerment. And we know that women in Australia live longer than ever before, but they've got less disposable income and less asset wealth than men, which of course makes them more vulnerable to economic insecurity, particularly later in life. We know that in Australia, if we closed that gender gap in terms of economic participation, we would boost our economic output by 13%. Geez, you'd think governments would think of that alone, just in terms of the economic sense. And when it comes to the broader region, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region, well, Asia-Pacific region, the UN tells us that if we closed or stopped the limitations on women's workforce participation, we would make $89 billion per annum. We would increase our economies by that much. Goldman Sachs tells us that closing the gender gap in employment in some of the major developing countries, around 15 of them in our region, would see an increase of 20% in per capita incomes by 2030. So I know you're all familiar with some of the statistics, and we'll hear more over the next couple of days, but it makes sense. So in addition to that basic human rights argument for empowering women, there are strong benefits to economies, and we also know it assists in the alleviation of poverty as well. Australia's new aid agenda puts the issue of women, but of course the issue of economic development at the centre of our poverty reduction efforts, because we recognise that the private sector is an engine of growth. We work through our diplomatic efforts and through our aid efforts to support women's economic participation by supporting national efforts. So we support women's livelihoods through skills development, vocational education. We work to ensure that women have access to markets, safe access to markets. And we assist business women, female leaders in the business area, to lead change in their countries, as well as encouraging changes to legislation that support and promote women's economic empowerment. One of the examples I like most, and it's certainly Deputy Secretary, interesting talking about some of the work that you're doing in Malaysia, but one of the NGOs that Australia funds in Bangladesh, for example, is BRAC. And some of you would be familiar with the initiative that targets those poorer households, that actually gives women grants or loans or poultry or plants in order to see them get involved in a small business way. And we know last year alone 90,000 families, 90,000 women were assisted by that particular program. So if we can make that kind of difference, it's extraordinary what we could come up with at this conference. We've also been supporting work to improve conditions for workers in the ready-made garment industry. We know that Australian retailers import $400 million each year of those garments from Bangladesh, for example. And we know that 80% of the workers in that industry, of course, are women. Australian retailers, and I suggest consumers, want to see conditions improve. And our government is working hard to ensure that's the case. Seriously, ladies and gentlemen, you should have heard the, DFAT wanted to know what I was going to be wearing tonight, just to make sure that I was promoting our important policies. But more seriously, Foreign Minister Julie Bishop is excited by the potential of IORA, not just in our chairmanship role, but also by the opportunities by events such as this. We know that the IORA member states comprise 30% of the world's population, I mean 2 billion people. It's extraordinary. We know that the region has some of the most populous countries, Indonesia or India, for example. We've got some of the fastest growing countries like India, Mozambique, Sri Lanka, for example. And it's also a region of great diversity of culture, history, religion, experiences. And all of these factors can inform how we approach women's empowerment. So, ladies and gentlemen, I said earlier we have the evidence. We know that's in. So why are we here? We're here today because we need to galvanise collective action. We need to build that momentum. We need to do it as individuals, obviously, identifying opportunities, the things that we can do in our own lives or our businesses. But we also need to mobilise coalitions and communities to work on this agenda. And we also need to mobilise governments. To make the most of this opportunity, we ask you at this IORA event to help shape IORA's agenda. We ask you to send a message to IORA governments that women are a powerful, untapped economic force. So the opportunity over the next 2 days is to identify practical actions that can be presented to the IORA foreign ministers when they're in Perth in October. I think this dialogue is a great chance to hear from a range of speakers and come up with some practical action. We look forward to drawing on your collective experiences, your stories, your ideas, and your work and wisdom. So once again, thank you all for travelling so far to attend this event. I hope it's a wonderful dialogue that you all enjoyed, and I look forward to the outcomes. Thank you very much.